Well, I'm very pleased to welcome to the Entheogenic Evolution today Ralph Metzner, and we're going to be discussing his new book, The Toad and the Jaguar, which is about 5-methoxy-dimethyltryptamine. Ralph, welcome to the Entheogenic Evolution.
Thank you. Thank you for inviting me.
Yeah, it's really excellent to have you here. So we've just been chatting and checking in a little bit, and you had sent me your book just a few days ago, and of course I eagerly got to it and started reading it right away. And it's a nice short book, which is something that I appreciate and enjoy. That it's a very big experience with 5-MeO, but you have a nice, succinct book that really covers a lot of bases. So the place that I would really like to start is, since you speak about this so much in the book, is kind of your own history of interaction with and experience of 5-MeO DMT and how that got started for you.
Well, I've been working with psychedelics since the early 60s. So, and actually heard about 5-MeO as well as DMT. It's better known chemical kind of relative sometime probably in the late 70s, early 80s. And at that point, I mentioned this story, this sort of, I don't know if it's a legend or if it's true. I know I actually heard this, it's told to me by Claudio Naranjo, one of the earliest Chilean researchers in psychedelic therapy, that he and Shogun had made an agreement, a tacit agreement, or to not publish their findings, because he and Shogun were working together on writing, various papers on the chemistry of hallucinogens in the early days, early 70s, to not publish their findings on 5-MeO in order to see if they could keep it off the radar screen of the prohibition-minded authorities, which had already banned DMT. By that time, DMT was banned like in late 60s or early 70s, along with everything else.
Yes.
Including bufotenine, which isn't even hallucinogenic.
I've always thought that one was really strange, that people could go to jail for owning a Bufo alvarius toad because of the bufotenine.
Well, yeah, it's not bufotenine, actually. I mean, the Bufo alvarius toad doesn't have bufotenine in it. It has 5-MeO DMT in it.
Right,
That's the thing.
Right.
But Bufo marinus, other toads, yeah. So, but anyway, so that as a result, it only became illegal in like about 5 years ago. So, but I agreed with the strategy of not writing about it and explicitly, or talking about it explicitly very much. So they succeeded in keeping it non-illegal, not prohibited, until about 5 years ago, as you know. Now, how many people in the meantime used it? I don't know. I think it's kind of strange. When did you first become aware of it?
I was vaguely aware of it in I would say the late 90s and early 2000s, but I had certainly no experience of it myself until early 2008. And also, as many people, I didn't really know anything about it. I had no idea that there was a difference between DMT and 5-MeO DMT.
But you knew DMT. We were familiar with DMT already.
Not from a personal experiential level. It was actually I personally experienced DMT in the extracted, crystallized form after I had first experienced 5-MeO. So that came after for me. And like many people, I had thought that, I'd heard about licking toads, that there was this idea that you would actually lick the toad. And, so
That's absurd.
Yeah, it's completely absurd. And there was a Simpsons
And it was even the
episode.
wrong toad. It was even the wrong. People were licking Bufo marinus. So you can't get anything from Bufo marinus except a sore tongue.
Yeah, so I really didn't know much of anything about it until a friend of mine directed me to the early version of James Orrock's book, Tryptamine Palace. And that's when I first really started to learn about it and read some actual accounts of people's experiences with it.
Right, yeah.
Yeah, and I had no idea that there was a difference between 5-MeO and, quote, regular DMT, and that difference is profound.
Yes.
A very,
And
very
even from a psychopharmacological, from a straightforward pharmacological point of view, the differences are so significant. First of all, the potency. And people often say DMT is the most potent, powerful. People don't understand the difference between the power and the potency of a drug. Yes, and 5-MeO is much more potent. Now, DMT is powerful, just like all the other drugs. They're equally powerful in the sense of the depth that they can take you to. But potency means how little you need. So 5-MeO is much more potent than DMT.
Yes.
Because to get a full dose of DMT, you'd have to take 60 milligrams at least, 60 to 70 some take, which is like if you're smoking it, you have to take like 3 to 4 deep drafts into your lungs. Now, 5-MeO is active at a level of 5 to 15 milligrams. In other words, 10 times as potent.
And that's something that I've found that DMT aficionados are often very skeptical of, and they have a hard time believing because they're so enamored with the DMT experience. Right. And you tell them, well, actually, 5-MeO is significantly stronger, and they have a hard time believing. They're like, no, DMT is the top of the line. And well, actually, 5-MeO is quite a bit more powerful.
Yes. Well, yeah, but that's the thing. They don't appreciate the difference. Yes, you can get to the same level of intensity of effect, but it's much easier to do so with 5-MeO, and therefore, and then the length of the effect is that's also a function of the method of ingestion. So DMT, when it's smoked, lasts like 5 minutes, and the 5-MeO at least lasts about 3 times as long. So there's a slight difference in the rate of absorption apparently. But then the key difference comes up, and so I think DMT is vastly overrated. It has a spectacular effect, but then what can you do with a 5-minute experience?
Right.
In terms of, I'm a therapist, so I'm interested in, or if you're using it for creativity or something, it's like being shot out of a cannon, and boom, and you see fireworks, and you come back and you think, well, what was that?
Exactly.
Plus, it's like a big stress on the nose. Now, to try to snort 5-MeO, to try to snort DMT, I don't think anybody's ever tried it. Because to snort that amount of powder into your nose would be very painful and burning.
Yes, I think that would just be a miserable experience.
Yeah, miserable. I don't think I know of no one who's ever tried it. So I think the 5-MeO is in relationship to DMT is underrated, and
Absolutely.
So is snuffing method underrated compared to smoking. And the other thing about the snuffing method, it's the traditional indigenous way. The indigenous people don't smoke these substances. The Indians, they snuff them with assistance. They snuff the plant, and they go to great lengths, as we were talking, blowing the stuff into their noses. So, and that's where the chemical, of course, is a big advantage.
Yeah, there's actually a couple things that I'd like to pick up on there. The first, just quickly to go back and compare DMT to 5-MeO DMT, something that I've found with 5-MeO is that I guess I would call it the flavor is much sweeter and smoother than DMT, which tends to be much spicier. So I could imagine that snorting DMT would just be a terrible experience because it's so spicy, it's so active in that sense that it would just be burning your nose.
Yeah, it would burn your nose, exactly.
And then also regarding the snuffing method, I think that that's a really important issue to talk about, because something that I see a lot in the dialogue out there about DMT is that there's kind of this this argument that goes on within the community about, well, should you be taking ayahuasca, or is it okay to smoke DMT? And then a lot of people have this opinion of, well, the Indians, they take it the slow method, and so we've got to do the slow method the way that the indigenous cultures do, and you're not going to get any value out of the fast method. But something that's interesting with the 5-MeO snuffs is that even though it's not as rapid as the smoking method, it's a bit more similar to that than it would be, say, drinking ayahuasca, which is a many hours long experience.
Yeah,
And
absolutely.
so I wondered if you could talk a little bit about that in the indigenous context of why they might be using it in this method versus more of an ayahuasca method, or maybe it's just cultural happenstance that's how they ended up working with 5-MeO.
I mean, I'm not. I've read the literature on it. I mean, there's not very much literature on indigenous use of 5-MeO of the two plant, the yopo and whatever the other. There's two different plants from which 5-MeO is extracted, and a variety of half a dozen or more different tribes in Argentina and Venezuela and Brazil that use it, but the literature is all pretty much, they're very, very remote tribe, and it's very hard to know whether there's any active use of it anymore. But there are literature, and there's photographs of them, inhaling it. And there was a movie made about it too that showed it. I forget what it was called now, The Green Forest or something. The Emerald Forest. The Emerald Forest. Did you ever see that movie?
Yes, when I was really young, I remember watching that. It was about like a white kid who got lost in the jungle or something.
Yeah, he got abducted. Actually, it's based on a true story, and it shows them, and there are photographs published in the various books that shows them blowing this plant extract where they grind up the seeds, and then you have a seed powder, or they crush the leaves, and it's kind of a powder, but in order to get a sufficient dose of in one case it's the ground up root bark, and in the other case it's the leaves that are kind of mixed into a powder paste. I've never tried it in that. I've just read the descriptions, and then they have to take quite a bit, so they blast in this film I saw, they blasted into each other's nostrils through these huge tubes. They have to do it in order to get the amount, like 3 or 4 times. It's kind of a disgusting picture, actually, when you see it in the films, because the guy is like staggering around, and he's got brown sauce coming from his nostrils, and he's like staggering, and then he falls onto the ground in a trance, and then he's high, you see, and then he connects with the spirits. So this is a case where now, with ayahuasca, of course, that's a completely different story, because in ayahuasca, 5-MeO is, embedded in the process, along with DMT and other related chemicals, in a drink that is kept in the body and metabolized slowly because of the presence of the MeO enzyme blocking, so that it's not just immediately metabolized. And so then you have 4 to 5 hours to work with the same space. So I agree with that argument. I think it's much more useful to, if you're doing any healing or therapy on yourself or with somebody else, then to have 4 to 5 hours is much more useful than to have 5 minutes or 10 minutes. Yeah. And a half an hour is more useful than having 5 minutes. And an hour is more useful than. So it all depends. And in some ways, like in terms of if you're talking about the accessibility in a modern psychiatric medical context, I think the 5-MeO is even better than ayahuasca or any other drugs. I mean, modern therapists and psychiatrists don't want to spend, 5 to 6 hours or even, 3 to 4 hours with a therapist. I mean, they do it in the research project with MDMA, for example. But in my book, and that's what Stan Grof and Charlie Grove both said, the potential for the application of a substance that is over basically in an hour to an hour and a half would be enormous.
Yes, I think that that's really one of the tremendous advantages of 5-MeO. That one of the ways I kind of playfully describe it is that it can take you from zero to infinity and then back down again, all within under an hour to
Right.
have a very powerful, very productive experience. And certainly, if you come at it from the therapeutic perspective, that's highly functional.
Exactly. Right. Yeah. Yeah. And whether you and then how far you go, of course, is also a function of dosage and all of that. For the therapeutic, many of the therapeutic applications, you may not even be that interested in the mystical part. But anyway, so that all depends on the set and the setting, as we always say. So. Uh, and,
Yes, well, there's so many threads I want to pick up on here, so I'm trying to decide where to go first. Well, maybe I want to come back to the idea of the therapeutic setting, dosages, things like that. Something that I thought that was very interesting in your book that I thought maybe we could talk about for a minute is that you described that when you first started working with 5-MeO, that you often combined it with NN-DMT and then eventually decided just to go directly for the 5-MeO. So I was wondering if you could talk a little bit about those experiences and that process of deciding that just go with 5-MeO rather than the combination.
Yeah, well, this is early years,
Mm-hmm.
20, 30 years ago. And, um, I was just exploring, in other words, trying out different methods and different combinations and possibilities, and trying to get a sense of the territory. And DMT, of course, was more familiar, and in general, and so we tried, and in those days too, that was initially just with the smoking, combining the smoke, combining the two smokes, and it became very clear that you could distinguish one from the other. That the DMT seems to be more focused, produce more of the spectacular visuals.
Yes.
And whereas, and that's always been the thing about DMT, that captures the imagination of people like Terence and McKenna and many others, and this kind of kaleidoscopic, explosive thing of diamond, fractal, involving patterns into one another. But then I realized by comparing the two, then there's sort of no content very often. Terence talked about his little machine elves and so forth, but content is actually very little, short, because for one thing, that's so little time to find any content. I used to find, and people would say this when we were smoking the combination, that people would get the DMT hit, so to speak, very dramatic, kaleidoscopic stuff, filling the whole visual field, and after about some minutes, for 3 or 4 minutes, that would wear off, and then that would be as if it was a screen, and a scene would open up behind the screen, like in a theater. You see, have a screen at the beginning, then the screen lifts, and then the action takes place, and there's a three-dimensional scene that gradually emerges, sort of from the background. So I began to think of the initial DMT thing as being primarily hitting the rods and cones in the retina. It's
Right.
what Tim Leary used to call, in our book, The Psychedelic Experience, he called it the retinal circus. It's just like patterns, kaleidoscopic patterns. It's Paisley and kaleidoscopic patterns, three-dimensional and graphic and all of that. But no content. There's no faces, no figures, maybe like eyes or that's about it. No people, nobody you recognize, little machine elves, not mom and not dad. But, and then it's over. And then there's this kind of three-dimensional scene that emerges. And that, of course, is a function of the set and the setting. And, what's on your mind? What's in your mind? What are you looking for? Which is, of course, one of my main points. It's like, people with all the psychedelic drugs, the mind-expanding drugs, you can't really answer the question of, well, what does this drug do? Does it help you with pain or cough or anything like that? It doesn't do anything. The question is, what do you do with the drug?
Exactly.
What are you using it for? And why are you taking it?
Yeah. What are you
That
looking
gets you
for?
back to, yes, what's your intention? And that gets you back to, well, a very kind of basic psycho-spiritual question. What are you doing in life? What are you doing in your life?
Exactly.
Why are you here?
Yeah. And
That's the question the mystics ask. Why
right.
are we here?
Yeah. The opportunity for self-reflection and discovery.
Right, exactly. Yeah. But you have to set it up that way. And just to set it up, just to, just to see what it does. And a lot of people even in the sort of psychedelic underground still don't understand that question. Because you read on all these counts on the web, Arrowhead and so on, and people think, well, I just took this drug to see what it does.
Yeah.
I have to say, well, okay, okay, but to me, that's not really interesting. If you tell me a little bit more about what you were doing with the drug, then I might want to listen to your story.
I think that that's so important that often in my communications with people, asking about different entheogens and stuff, that often people come to me and say, wow, I read these accounts online and
Right.
that, I'm worried about this or something like that. And I often tell them that, well, people who are writing their stuff online, they don't necessarily really know what they're doing or why they're taking these things.
Right.
So that sometimes you get very skewed accounts. And so
Right.
I think it's very important to understand what kind of context people were in, what
Exactly.
kind of mindset, and why they're going about doing it. Are they just doing it for kicks, or are they doing it to really learn something? And
Right.
it makes such an important difference. So
It makes total difference. I mean, it's like 100% difference.
yeah, so tell us a little bit about the evolution of then how you came to understand using 5-MeO more in a therapeutic or more in a grounded kind of setting, kind of moving beyond the exploration stage to then really working with it as a tool with individuals.
Well, then yes, then and this, since it was all legal, in those times. So when gradually I became aware through Jonathan Ott, who was a good friend of mine, it still is, but that one, because I was smoking it, and smoking, it's like a 15 to 20-minute experience compared to DMT. And then he pointing out the snuffing method. But then also we were working with the toad, sometimes.
Mm-hmm.
I did a couple of expeditions to Arizona to find some of the toad and use that medicine. But, it's hard to access the toad, and it's such a beautiful animal, and I didn't really want to participate in anything that would in any way stress out the animal or
Mm-hmm.
diminish its range or its availability. So, and it's not necessary. And, from a scientific and from a research, any kind of point of view, if it's much easier to access and to ingest the 5-MeO. And you can't snuff. You wouldn't want to snuff the 5-MeO, the toad, I mean,
Mm-hmm.
because the burning of it detoxifies it. If there's any toxins in it, by the burning, the smoking method would be safe. But you can't say the same thing about the snuffing method. But I do feel, a great admiration for the toads, and it kind of changed my head around. So in the uses in the format that I work with always is that you spend approximately equal amount of time preparing for a session, no matter what it is, with what substance, and during the session, and integrating it afterwards. So if you're working with MDMA or something like that, which is like a 3 to 4 hour trip, then you should spend at least an equal amount of time preparing for it and deciding what your intention is, and meditating or whatever practice you have for getting yourself to a calm space and a beautiful space. Now I'm talking about use that's for personal growth. either healing or psychological healing or physical healing or personal growth or spiritual understanding or creativity enhancement. I'm not talking about recreational use. I'm not against recreational use, but it's just not, that's a different kind of thing. And then you're not doing research and you're not, necessarily contributing to overall knowledge, and recreation is okay. But so I'm talking about the use for personal growth, understanding, creativity, and healing,
Right.
and spiritual practice, and enhancement of those things. It's not that there's no spiritual practice inherent in the thing. I don't like terminology like the God molecule, things like that. I think it's very misleading. Or the spirit molecule. It's not spirit. It's like a mixing up of levels. God is not in a molecule, and there are molecules all around. And of course, the Creator is in everything,
Right.
but not in one specific molecule as opposed to another molecule.
Right.
It's a mixing up of levels. And I also don't think that spiritual experiences can be categorized in a scientific framework. Spirituality is a different thing than science. It's a different way of knowledge. And I think in many ways it's disrespectful in a spiritual way to talk about the God molecule, and these experiences, these spiritual experiences are produced by these molecular substances. They're not produced by the substance. The substance is not produced by the substance. Connection with spirit is connection with spirit. It comes from spirit. It comes from spirit. And it can occur with or without a substance. Lots of people have mystical spiritual experiences without any substance whatsoever. But it's kind of like Aldous Huxley called it, a gratuitous grace. It's a gift given to us at sometimes within certain contexts. If the setting are right and appropriate, and the preparation and the person's karma or whatever it is, there can be that kind of unexpected breakthrough to a mystical experience, which you can only talk about afterwards.
Right.
And can't really put in a bottle or categorize it like that. You can just be amazed. And then you can talk about all the groundwork. Anyway, so the basic idea that I've been working with and is to spend equal amount of time and attention devote to preparing yourself, and with things, and that would be true of ayahuasca or anything like that. Fasting, all the things that people say, and preparing the ground, preparing the space where you are, including selecting the people that you're with, and how you're going to do it, and the technology that you're going to use, what music you're going to play, all those kinds of things, preparing, and then the experience itself, and then the integration period afterwards, and how you record it, discuss it, describe it, integrate it into your life, like that. Mm-hmm. So that's a kind of a rough framework that we use.
Yeah, and I just wanted to point out, like, the second to last line of your book here, just kind of echoing what you were just mentioning, is that the substances do not create, but reveal.
Right.
And I think that that's such an important way of understanding and looking at the entheogenic experience, that it's not the molecule itself or whatever substances is that you're using, it's not creating something. It's actually revealing aspects of yourself that are already always there.
Yeah, and that might be revealed in other ways as well.
Right.
And the substance doesn't always reveal it. I selected some of the accounts in my book, and they're pretty impressive. But I have at least an equal amount of accounts from people that I've also collected who took the 5-MeO, and they had some interesting insights into family relationships, but nothing particularly spiritual or mystical or anything like that. So it's not that taking the drug is going to not guarantee anything.
Right.
Absolutely not.
Right. It's not a mechanical process. It's not add this molecule and you'll get X experience.
Yes. No.
Yeah. It doesn't work that way. So maybe
And that's true of all the so-called psychedelic drugs.
Yes.
But it's the hardest thing for people to actually get into, the general public get into their mind. That's why these substances, I think now, historically speaking, that's, I think, why these substances have always been secret, kept secret, because people don't understand it. Because every other drug known to medicine, you say, whether it's for asthma or for it's for this condition or for pain, most often pain. You take the pills, and this will happen. And even in the extent of psychological or psychiatric medicine, you have the stimulants like the uplifting mood elevators, and the tranquilizers or depressants, putting the energy down, like sleeping pills and all of that. And it's sort of one-dimensional. And you can pretty much guarantee to anybody who takes a tranquilizer, 90% of the time they're going to feel more tranquil. They're not going to have an expansion or contraction of consciousness. Consciousness is going to stay the same, but they're just going to feel more calm. Now, with the consciousness expanding drugs, which is a term I actually now have come to prefer to going back to the earliest term, to prefer to psychedelic, because psychedelic has all this other cultural baggage associated with it, Paisley patterns and all this kind of stuff. And consciousness expanding was Leary's original term. And Hoffman, I came across some correspondence from Albert Hoffman. He said he really liked that term because, I now prefer to use that term, because it makes us think about what kind of idea we have about consciousness. I sort of think consciousness can expand. It's like, who knew? Who knew that it was the kind of thing that could expand? Not only can it expand, it can also contract. And that's what we call concentration. You see, and that means that concentration, when you want to concentrate, you don't take a consciousness expanding drug. Like, you don't want to take a consciousness expanding drug while you're driving, for example.
Right.
Or while you're doing your job or meeting with your lawyer or whatever. You want to set aside a time where the outer environment is completely calm and you don't have to do anything. It's like when you go into a meditation, you're not doing the laundry at the same time or, driving around. You just do that. And you create a setting and maybe even put on eye shades and so you can see inside rather than staring at what's out around you.
And of course, when consciousness is expanding, then we start to realize just the vast quantity of content that's actually there in consciousness, in the variety of experience that takes place within consciousness. So maybe we could talk a little bit about now, what are some of the variety of effects that you've seen and experienced yourself with 5-MeO in terms of what people are getting out of that, what kinds of experiences that they're having, and what kind of variability you've seen there?
Well, there are in the book, I quote from some passages where people go into this very, very profound state of total unity, what one would call the mystical kind of oneness.
Yes.
The oneness of everything. And then sometimes even like nirvana means actually emptiness, and the Buddhists talk about emptiness or fullness, emptiness, fullness. It's a kind of a state of unconditional, boundaryless, all-inclusive kind of cosmic consciousness. I like the term cosmic consciousness, and then where, in a way, nothing is really happening, but everything is happening.
Right.
And people say stuff like the void or the plenum void is a term from mysticism. The plenum void meaning like void, empty and full at the same time.
Right. That fundamental paradoxical nature of that experience, where it's everything and nothing all at the same time.
Right. And then sometimes it comes like that's the first thing that people have, and then sometimes they dissociate in that, see, and then they start to slowly come back from the experience, and from the smoking. It can be like in the account I quote from one of Stan Grof's book, where he describes his experience, and then then from this total undifferentiated oneness, then maybe thoughts begin to arrive, and oh yes, I remember there's this guy called my name, whatever it is,
Right.
who took this drug. Or and there might be an intermediate stage where you're just seeing archetypal figures like gods and goddesses, or planets, sometimes outer space planets, suns and planets, and you have the feeling of being actually in outer space, and then coming back down, kind of contraction, coming back down, and then maybe archetypal figures of gods and goddesses and angels and miraculous animals and creatures like that. And then gradually, they also, almost suddenly, then the memory of, oh yes, I took this drug, and then gradually into the more personal. In the one experience I quote in the book from Stan Grof that he'd written up in his book, he thought, oh, I must have died. This is the Dharmakaya. This is
Right.
quite like remembering from the Tibetan Book of the Dead. I must have died. I'm in the second bardo. I'm in the first bardo. And only then, after a little while, after the intensity diminishes, in real time, maybe 3 or 4 minutes later. But see, you're beyond space-time. The space-time, the ordinary space-time dimension that we call reality is completely gone, and you're gone out of it. Now, in fact, you're not gone out of it because you do come back. If you were gone out of it and you wouldn't come back, you'd be what we call dead.
Right.
But these are like death rebirth experiences, and people do feel them that way, and that's why death rebirth has always been and always will be, the most significant metaphorical description of these kinds of experiences that are completely transcendent or transcendental.
Right. And because of that transcendental nature, that these are also the kinds of experiences that are, in a sense, that they're effectively impossible to communicate to someone who has never experienced it. Because you can say, well, you experience yourself as dying and then just moving into eternity. And if you haven't had that experience, there's no reference for that, because every reference is a content of consciousness. I mean, it's one thing if we can say, well, I saw gods or angels, that people can get an idea of what that might be like. But to say, well, I died and was absorbed into the all, that if you haven't had that experience, you cannot actually understand what that means. You have to experience it for yourself.
Right. And that's what the mystics always say and have always said. This is ineffable. It's called ineffable or indescribable. And then they spend, maybe write a whole book on hundreds of pages of trying to describe it, but recognize, no, it still can't, I still can't describe it. I can describe what happened before and what happened afterwards, but like that. So that's that inherent paradoxical nature. And, but then from a psychological or psychotherapeutic point of view, the most interesting things happen in the more intermediate stages. Either when you're coming down or before when you're coming down, starting to come down through more the intermediate dimensions. If you think of like the cosmic oneness cosmic one voidness as being kind of the ultimate dimension, but then there are all these other intermediate dimensions, including where we have awareness of spirits and deities and like that, and then archetypes, you might say. And then gradually coming more into the personal, social, where we're looking at our personal relationships and society, and then remembering the intention, which might be to look at in terms of healing something in psychological healing or.
Okay, so we just encountered a few Skype problems there, but Ralph, you were just telling us we were getting into kind of some of the physical properties of what occurs when people work with 5-MeO, and you were starting to talk about limberness in the joints and ability to do yoga and things like that. So if you could return to that subject, it'd be great.
Well, yeah, and also in the context of people when using the substance, for the purposes of, with the intention of healing. So So see then, which gets us back to the intention and the setting. So of course, if you're in a healing session, whether you're a therapist or a physician, and I think the applications for what I was saying is that the possible applications for medical psychiatric research there would be very great. Now, in the sort of underground, I think of the research that I do as being in the underground, not in the underground, the sense of I prefer that term rather than to the counterculture, because the underground is not against the mainstream culture, but it's underground because it has to remain hidden, because in many aspects of it are technically illegal, and people can go to jail. So, and they don't want to go to jail. Strangely enough, most people prefer not to go to jail.
I wonder why.
Especially if they haven't committed a crime, you see.
Exactly.
You're talking about crimes without victims. So the larger social context has to be taken into account. So the writings, my writings, I have nothing against mainstream research on it, but mainstream research lags tremendously behind in terms of the tremendous possible implications and applications of these substances, all of these psychedelic substances, because of this legal restriction.
Yes.
Mainstream doctors and physicians can't do it, can't even do research with it. You can only do, to do research with it is extremely expensive and time consuming and highly limited. So an underground exists in terms of numbers far greater, and those people are also scientists and they're also doing research. They don't have access to the same kind of thing, but just so that it's incumbent, people do use all kinds of media, including the internet, to record their observations. That's what my book is trying to do in that regard, and all my writings, and that of many other people too. So you start off by describing the phenomena that you're seeing, and taking all the necessary precautions that you would always do, and holding constant all the variables so that you can see it. So you're not doing research when you just drop acid at a dance. That's okay. Right. It's okay to drop acid at a dance if that's what you want to do. But that's different than doing scientific research. And it's not a double-blind placebo-controlled study either, which is sort of held up as the so-called, the ideal standard for experimentation in substance. It's absurd. That's the standard when you're trying to test which particular systems in the body, a drug is trying to affect. This is way before you're ever doing double-blind placebo-controlled studies. You're doing what are called exploratory studies where you're trying to determine, well, what's the range of possible effects that can happen. And gathering data. This is descriptive, gathering data, gathering information about the set and the setting, and this is what people report. And then later on, you try to isolate the variables. And so that's my little sermon on scientific methodology. It's an anthropological method, the participant observer.
Yes.
Because the researcher goes into the underground and participates as an observer and describes, this is what people do, this is how it's best done, this is how you avoid the dangers, the pitfalls, the mistakes, and this is how people prepare for themselves, and this is how people integrate the experiences like that. So each individual takes responsibility for their own safety and the people that they are with them, around them, and there are agreements made when people do it together. They make agreements with one another about how to conduct themselves in the session. Like you read the books by Shulgin, on all the different kind of the tryptamines and the phenethylamines, TCAL and PCAL. He gives a detailed description at the beginning of the book about the group setting that he had and the different collaborators and how they conducted themselves. And so that then when they take the different drugs, or 174 different phenethylamines, and they say, you had half a dozen people saying at this dose we had this and at this dose we had that, like that, then you can say, well, okay, so the set and the setting was all consistent. And it's the same group of people, the same kind of environment, the same kinds of agreements. And so then it makes sense to say, well, this drug did more of that and this drug did more of that. So that to me is the appropriate method to use. It's not doing double-blind placebo control. That comes much, much later when you're trying to tease out what particular thing does what particular thing.
Mm-hmm.
So that's really the spirit in which I present the reports of people, in the sessions from people that I've talked to and interviewed, and this is the kinds of things that they found. So from a therapeutic point of view, I don't even, so I have no way of knowing to what extent the kind of cosmic, mystical experiences are necessary for the healing. Maybe they are, maybe they're not. I think it's an open question. It's almost like Aldous Huxley used to say, it's a gratuitous grace. It's like a grace that is given, even although we didn't ask for it. We didn't know to ask for it. Sometimes.
Yeah. The way that I tend to describe it, to kind of use a metaphor, is that the ego itself is a construction of these limited energetic patterns, and the more we're working with those patterns, again, as a metaphor, that the hard drive of our being gets kind of deep, or gets fragmented in a sense. And that for me, the value of the deep mystical experience is that that's when someone is fully transcending these patterns of the ego, and that's what allows for the deepest level of defragmenting of their personal hard drive, where the junk gets out of the way, and anything that's been repressed at that point has an opportunity to escape and to ground out. And then as the person reintegrates from that, they're in a more balanced and holistic center than they were before. So that's just how I would personally describe the value of that.
I can go along with that. The only thing I would add would be that the integration doesn't happen automatically. It has
no.
There has to be the intention, for the preparation and the intention for the integration, and then there's different ways of integrating. Things like talking about it with each other, writing it down, and applying it in your life. And again, in the underground, the countercultural sort of, or the common underground recreational use, that factor is pretty much more or less absent, I would say. And it's also more or less absent in the traditional cultures, like the people in South America that take ayahuasca. The people have this big thing about this idealizing of ayahuasca, this miracle drug. Yeah. They do zero preparation and zero integration. After they drink the tea at night, they just go home and go back to sleep it off and go back to work the next morning. They don't talk about it afterwards. They think that's a weird Western thing, as the indigenous people. And the same for the churches, you see. The ayahuasca churches, the Santo Daime and the UDV, they don't do any integration whatsoever. They just go in, they drink the tea, they do the dance, or they sit quietly and listen to the UDV. They sit quietly and listen to sermons. And then after, I went to several of them, and I asked people afterwards what was their experience. They didn't understand the question. What do you mean, what was my experience? It's like you ask a person, they just come out of church, what was your experience?
Yeah.
I didn't have an experience. I just went to church.
Yeah, it's a focus where the ceremony itself becomes the thing.
That's the thing. We're just doing the ceremony. It happens to include drinking this disgusting, smelling, tasting tea.
Yeah, I've spent a lot of time with the Santo Daime Church here in Ashland, and I'm not trying to disparage anyone or in any way, but I certainly find that people who attend Santo Daime Church, they love going to church.
Yeah, they like going to church. Yeah. And for them, it's not therapy, it's just church.
Right.
I've been to several of their things. I like them. I like them better, actually, than the UDV, because they sing and they dance, and it's sort of like gospel. To me, it's like gospel. It's a ceremony of, celebration and giving praise to God, and Holy Spirit, like that. And singing, like gospel, back and forth, joyous celebration. But I've had clients, therapy clients, who would go to these ayahuasca Santo Daime sessions every week, And they never did anything. I finally had to recommend to this person that she stopped because she wasn't integrating any of the experiences.
Mm-hmm.
We just go there, sing hymns, have some visions, wasn't doing any psychological work with it at all.
So to kind of tie a couple threads together and return
Yes.
to a somewhat earlier topic, that when I first started experiencing 5-MeO for myself, what was happening to me is I was going through these very fluid, spontaneous movements that would just occur, and
Right,
from the ego perspective, it was always, wow, who's doing this?
right,
Or it
right.
would even, it was after the fact, that not even being aware that I was doing
Mm,
these movements, and then it finally, those spontaneous fluid movements
mhm,
broke through for me one day when I was at a Santo Daime work. It was a seated work, so we're all supposed to be seated in our chairs and not moving. And all
mhm.
of a sudden, my body just started moving and
Oh,
going, and it lasted for about 3 hours. I had to be escorted out of the room and given
yes, yes.
another place to go
Because you're
do that.
bugging the other people, right?
Exactly. You're not supposed to be doing that in church.
Uh,
So I wanted to talk to you.
was the feeling pleasant?
Oh, it was amazing. I mean, in
Yeah, it
terms of
was
the
ecstatic.
yeah, in terms of the experience itself, I was just sitting there with my eyes closed and just
Uh-huh.
watching the visuals of the daime, and then this infinitely recursive fractal face came
Uh,
right up to me in the vision, and it just said, "Don't you want to let me be you?"
mhm,
And my impression was, wow, the daime is talking to me. And so I said, sure, why not? And
mhm.
the instant I internally said that is when my body just started moving, and
Oh, right.
there was zero resistance. It was just pure fluidity. There was no difference between inner and outer, between my perception of the visions and the
Right.
energy of the experience. It was one total experience. And it
Right.
was a really tremendous breakthrough
Yeah,
for
yeah.
me. And so this is something that you've written
Right.
quite a bit about in your book, is observing
Yeah,
these kinds of reactions of movements in individuals. So I was wondering if you could talk a little bit about that and
yeah.
what you've
That's when
seen.
spirit comes into you. See, spirit comes into you and moves through you, or just like in other traditions, the spirit comes into you and speaks through you.
Yes.
Which is actually the way it always works. When you and I are talking, even right now, spirit is actually moving through us and speaking through us.
Yes.
Because we are spirits. It's not like we occasionally have a spiritual experience. You know, like the people who say, well, actually, we're spirits having a human experience. The spirits is the essence. And sometimes this high, you could call it the higher aspect of a being. Or this is the lower, what we're in normally in, including the psychophysical organism, is the personality organism. And then there's the essence. And then there's the, so what you're channeling through the movements may be in a sense, essentially, it's your own spirit being, but it may also be your own spirit being in contact with another spirit being, commonly known as a deity or Shiva, or who knows what it, and that might be something that you might do or a person might do. It's like ask further, well, who is it actually that's making me make these movements? And you may or may not get an answer, but you may get a kind of a sense about it afterwards, or reflecting on it, or feeling on it. So that's what I found. Sometimes the connection with spirit is just there. You feel that you're being moved. It's not possession. It's like because you've given permission. See, I like how the spirit asked you, "Can I come in?" Like asked you, could I visit your house?" Which is your personality, your psychophysical organism. That's your house. Spirit knocked on the door and said, "Can I come in?" And you said, "Yes, please do," and invited him or her in. Then it moved in your organism, which turns out can move an organism. And maybe it was Shiva, maybe it was your divine being, maybe in divine being in connection with another divine being. I don't know, and you don't know unless you ask. And even then, it's often hard to say. And in a way, you could say it doesn't matter, and you're just grateful and uh, ecstatic that it happened. And yeah, I had a very similar experience. I remember Spirit came in and moved me, and I was so happy to move. I willingly gave over. Yes, please move me,
Yeah.
move my arms. I'll try to keep up, or rather, let go. And I felt I was uh, channeling Shiva at one point. I was trying to get into the Shiva, dancing Shiva posture, but I couldn't quite make it because, he has to stand on one leg and raise the other leg and
It-
hold the two arms in a particular position.
that could be
It's kind of
quite
tricky.
challenging. Yeah.
Yeah, you might fall down.
And something that I would use to describe these kinds of experiences is that this occurs in individuals when their ego is most dissolved and most open, and also when the individual is in a level of profound relaxation that, and if you haven't experienced it, this is another one of these things that if you haven't experienced it, you don't know how tense you are until you actually get into these complete levels of surrender where this movement and this energy opens up. And then all these tensions that you might have been holding in your body, they just release, and it feels so wonderful. And after that, your body feels fresh and limber and just activated in a way that previously you can't even imagine.
Right, right. And that can absolutely happen, yeah. And it's beautiful and ecstatic. And the other can also happen because the spirit can try to come into the person, and this has happened many times, and I have examples of it. And the person isn't quite ready for it, doesn't understand that there's a process of letting go, not letting go in the sense of just like take me or something, or passing out, but letting all go of control. And then there's a kind of a struggle, and then people get into these kriyas, which are also known in the yoga tradition, where people have these kind of jerky movements, and they're kind of resistant, and they might start babbling and making weird sounds, like that, and which can be quite scary to the other participants, unless there's some way to handle it or come to terms with it. And the guy who wrote the book on the 5-MeO.
I think I think you're thinking. Oh no, I'm sorry.
James Orrock,
right.
The divine. What's he called?
Tryptamine Palace.
Tryptamine Palace. Yeah, he describes how he found himself having these movements, and he was embarrassed by them, so he didn't want to take the substance with other people, so they wouldn't see him, doing these funny, jerky movements, which is understandable. You don't want to expose yourself. But at the same time, I think that indicates that there's some healing, some dissolving of resistance pattern that's needed in the body. And so in my book, I describe in some instances where this substance can be, again, at a much lower dosages, also be used as an adjunct to body work and healing, and especially like prenatal work. But that would be individual and not group. See, there's always a big difference between individual work and group work. Obviously, if you're doing a group ceremony, you need to stay put. You can't. But if you're just doing one or a small group of people, and you have somebody watching over you, somebody should always be there with this medicine in particular. Somebody should always be there to watch over your body to make sure that nothing untoward happens. And then then you can go into the kriya, as what people start, and the weird twists and the weird sounds, and try to get whatever is obstructing the energy to come out.
Yeah, another metaphor that I like to use is that as this energy is opening up and expanding, that if a person isn't willing or able to completely surrender into it, it's kind of like taking a needle and scratching it across the surface of a record, where it comes out as just gibberish and noise, versus when they fully surrender and relax into it, it's like the needle finds the groove and then the song plays. And then the song comes to a natural conclusion where that energy expresses itself, and then it goes away. And it's the struggle that creates this jarring, jagged, struggle that people go through, where they might actually be flailing around the room and screaming and babbling, speaking in tongues, things like this.
Yeah. Well, that's right. And it's not always easy or even possible for a person to just let go.
Right.
And that's where, I'm close to Stan Grof and his way of working with psychedelics, that he's been the pioneer. I mean, he would probably say what's happening there is you're getting into prenatal experiences. And prenatal patterns are very, very difficult, very difficult to get to. Once you can't work with those in a group setting, absolutely not. And you can, but because you're going down into very, very deep levels of body-mind memory,
Yes.
cellular memory, before you were even a human being, before when you were a fetal being. It's a different kind of organism altogether, you see, but has consciousness, and we have the memory, and the memory is built into every single cell of our bodies. Every single cell of our body comes from that original cell fusion of the male and female cells, the sperm and ovum, and carries the DNA and all the patterns, all the ancestral patterns, all the incarnational patterns, karmic patterns from past lives. Everything is there and can be awakened. And in particular, it can be awakened in these kinds of substances. That's why in my book, I have a whole section on, the use of the substance in prenatal work. But again, that would be always needs to be done individually rather than in group ceremony. The big difference is whether you're doing a group ceremony and then you have to have agreements and somebody to pay attention to this time space. Probably there should be one person that should always be like conducting and putting out, monitoring the medicine so people don't just keep randomly taking more and more. Anyway, the big difference between ceremonies in a group and then individual work, of course, is a completely other kind of story. And for the kind of therapeutic and medical applications, those are the ones that are. And in the traditional ayahuasca ceremonies, of course, they have their own, they have their own paradigm. It's a completely different non-Western paradigm. They don't do any preparation or any after effects. They just go and do it. It's right. a shamanic paradigm.
Right. Something that is mentioned in your book that I'd like to ask you about for a minute here is something that seems very simple, but this is something that I've often seen becomes a major issue for people, is just the question of breathing and managing your breath properly when going through these radical expansions of energy. And I believe that you comment that sometimes when people might have a history of working meditation or yoga practices where there's lots of emphasis on specific kinds of breaths, that sometimes it seems like it gets in the way of them relaxing in the experience a little bit. So I was wondering if you could expand on that and tell us a little bit more.
Well, breathing, I think Andrew Weil and others have said, breathing is the master key to healing. So, in yoga and all these traditions, that's breathing and I would say awareness of breath. Yeah, I've not found particularly to recommend focused, controlled breathing practices combined with psychedelics. Now, Stan Grof, you see, developed this whole method called holotropic breathing, which is actually hyperventilation, but conscious and intentional hyperventilation. But he himself would agree, and so would everybody else who's that method. You do not want to combine holotropic breathing with psychedelic or consciousness enhancing substances, because the hyperventilation intensive breathing is itself a method of activating these kind of deep body memories to kind of to break through memory blocks through force, almost from inside. And when you're working with a psychedelic from the point of view of healing, that's not the method you're using. You're kind of slipping in at the molecular level, and from the molecular level itself, going up into the cells and like that. And so and these sensations associated with those experiences are very, very subtle experiences. So if you start doing like a heavy breathing, you're going to overpower the energies, and you're much more likely to, it's like, Stan Grof and Jack Cornfield do workshops together. Well, Jack Cornfield teaches mindfulness meditation, and Stan Grof, teaches this holotropic breath work. They do it. They don't teach it at the same time. They do a workshop where they teach the people on one day. They practice mindfulness meditation with even regular breathing. No holding breath, just even regular breathing, conscious breathing. That's the thing. Consciously breathing, paying attention to the breath. That's a completely different story than forcing the breath.
Right.
Not counting, just consciously breathing. And deep breathing, easily, relaxing as you breathe out, breathing in consciously, like that. Always bringing the mind back to focus on the breathing. So they do that on alternate days. So I would say any preparation that you've had and practice that you've had in mindfulness meditation and consciously breathing would be great in terms of preparation for the Jaguar experience, and then noticing it during the experience, or what I call the Jaguar.
Yeah, why
noticing when your breath gets stuck, then you want to, oh no, just take a deep breath.
Right.
Your breath gets stuck is like the energy is getting stuck in some part of the body, some part of the body mind.
Right.
And possibly because it flashes back to a trauma you had when you were a little boy, or when you were prenatal, or whatever. You don't often know, you see. And there's
right.
methods of using body work to access those things.
Right. And then if there is that sudden awareness of that issue, that there can then be a contraction in the holding of breath, or then the attempt to push it out with the breath, rather than just relaxing and being with it and letting it sort itself out on its own, in a sense, naturally.
Right.
So you just mentioned Jaguar. So why don't we go ahead and just talk about the title of your book, just so people understand. It's called The Toad and the Jaguar. So tell us about that.
The toad, of course, is the toad,
yes.
Bufo alvarius, which happens to have, unique among toads as far as we know so far. Nobody's has, and it's not Bufo marinus, is not the cane toad. And Andrew Weil and the other, Wade Davis, published an essay in '97, I think, identifying Bufo alvarius, which is a Colorado River toad. Lives actually in Arizona, it's a wonderful toad. It's beautiful, very unusual, under the ground. And spends like 6 months of the year or 9 months of the year underground, hiding out, and then comes out and eats flies. And it has these little glands along the side that, have this toad slime, you might say, that contains 5-methoxy-DMT, which is for it, it's a predator defense. So if a dog comes and wants to bites into the toad, he gets a shot of 5-MeO DMT into his gums, and he loses interest and loses awareness of. It doesn't kill the dog, you see.
No, it just keeps him busy for a little while.
Yeah, for 20 minutes he's sort of out of it. We saw that. I tell the story. We saw that one time at somebody's house where, the dog was sort of out of it, lolling on the ground, his tongue hanging out. We thought, oh my God, he's dying. And then a woman told us in Arizona, she used to have the toad all around a swimming pool, and the dog would bite into it. And then he'd sort of fall down, and he'd be kind of out of it for 20 minutes, half an hour. And it would have forgotten about the toad.
Right.
So it's a very effective predator defense. It kills neither the dog nor the toad. So, and it's kind of a mystery, almost like a cosmic joke, Why should the toad venom of this toad, defensive toad, why should it have this effect on human beings, potentially, giving them experiences of cosmic mystical consciousness?
Right.
What's that all about? See, this is a great mystery. And science teaches us everything evolves, they don't say for a reason, but for a function. But this, anyway, it's a mystery. It's a beautiful mystery. And it's like a gift, a gratuitous gift, And so tell me again what your question was. I lost the track here.
So then that's the toad, and then we have the jaguar. So just what you
Oh, how
mean
did the
by that.
Jaguar name arise?
Yeah.
Yeah, we started experimenting with the toad and with the toad slime, but we didn't have very much of that. And then we started experimenting with the 5-MeO in those days, and then the 5-MeO DMT combination, and then there was something about I had been visiting the Maya country in in Mexico, in the state of um, where you're looking at these Mayan temples, and there are these pictures of the Jaguar god.
Mm-hmm.
And so it's a picture of a jaguar, and out of the jaguar's open mouth comes this face of this deity, or maybe this shaman.
Right.
And so when we were smoking the 5-MeO with the DMT, there was something about the suddenness. So the jaguar deity always, for me, the jaguar is a predator and attacks suddenly. So the jaguar shamans would be ones that would be, there's this incredibly alert attentiveness,
Mm-hmm.
very, very widely awake attentiveness, to seize the moment, you might say. Seize the predator if he's hunting for a prey, but seize the moment, you see. Very highly awake.
Yes.
Total focus, concentration, and to move suddenly into whatever it is that you're wanting to move into. And that seemed like a good description of the way the Jaguar medicine, which basically initially was the DMT 5-MeO combination, that comes on. It comes on very quickly, as you know.
Yes.
When you smoke it, especially, it's like,
here we go.
People are still holding the pipe in their mouth.
Yeah.
And suddenly they're seized. You see, they're seized, literally. And so because of that sudden onset, we could, I use that as a code name, basically.
Yeah.
And but then I had an experience, and when I mentioned before that at some point, initially we were using a combination of Jaguar and DMT and 5-MeO. And at some point, I decided to stop using the DMT and just work with the 5-MeO instead, and work with the snuff instead of the smoke. Once I've been introduced to the snuff, and then I had a vision, like a dream or a vision during that first experience, where it said to me, the spirit of the medicine said to me, "Jaguars don't smoke." And I realized, yeah, jaguar, like other cats, don't smoke. They don't like fire.
Right.
They do, however, sniff, you see,
right,
which is like snorting. You think of a cat going around, its whiskers twittering. I remember watching my cat. This was the thing. I was watching my cat, who was looking through a window at a bird on a fence outside through the window. And she was like incredible focus, right? Incredible focus on this thing that she couldn't reach, and her tail was twitching back and forth. And she was practically trembling, and her little whiskers were trembling. I thought, so the suddenness of the onset seemed like a very cat-like, jaguar-like thing.
Yeah.
But then when you're so that sort of became our code name for that medicine, taken as a snuff, or and some people, I guess, would still smoke it. It was just the mysterious ways the underground works.
Yes. Well, Ralph, this has just been a delightful conversation with you today. I've already kept you for well over an hour, and I just want to say that I highly recommend this little book of yours. I think it's a wonderful introduction to anyone who's curious about 5-MeO, that you really cover a lot of different bases in here. So it's very thorough, even though it's a rather short book. And so I definitely recommend it. I enjoyed reading it myself.
would you mind giving people the website where they can get it? Because you can't get it in bookstores, basically. Go to,
Yes, please tell us where we can find it.
yeah, www.Green Earth Found. I have this nonprofit organization called Green Earth Foundation. So it's Green Earth Found, or one word, .org.
And of
And you'll
course,
see it there and all my other books as well.
yes, I was just going to mention you, of course, have written a number of books, some of them specifically focusing on different psychedelic medicines. You, of course, have Sacred Mushrooms of Visions. You have Vine of the Spirits. So you have a number of really excellent books there. Like I mentioned, I've certainly have read some of your books over the years and have always enjoyed your perspective, and really happy to see that you've put out this book about 5-MeO. And so now, just to kind of wrap up, now that the cat is out of the bag,
Yes.
as you mentioned in the book, that of course 5-MeO was made illegal just in January of 2011, so not too long ago. And
Right.
so now we don't necessarily need to be so secretive about it because it's been scheduled, quite unfortunately. But what do you see as the way forward of working with this medicine?
You don't need to be secretive about it if you're currently using it,
Of course.
which of course I'm not recommending. And but talking about it is not illegal so far anyway, and hopefully it'll remain so. And you were saying about the way forward.
Yeah. So now that there's no real need to hold back in terms of discussions about it,
Right.
because it's been scheduled, so
Right.
we can't do anything about that at the moment. So
Right.
how would you like to see kind of
I'd
the
like to do research
conversation?
being done. Yeah,
Okay.
I gave a copy to Rick Doblin and MAPS, for whom I'd like to do a pitch because they're doing wonderful work in terms of sponsoring and raising funds for all these different research projects, and they're doing this fantastic number of projects on the use of MDMA in the treatment of PTSD, which is a really, really good, incredibly important problem, and the most promising method, MDMA therapy for the treatment of PTSD, which is huge in demand and costly, and other research projects with under medical auspices in different parts of the country. So I'm hoping my book will, among other things, stimulate researchers to engage in research projects with it, because from that kind of point of view, it has a big advantage, even over something like MDMA. An MDMA or session, after all, takes 3 to 4 hours, and actually the research project, the person stays in the hospital overnight, and so for therapy, and so the time length duration is very, very, very useful. And basically recommending people, I'm recommending people explore 5-MeO DMT rather than DMT. DMT, I think, has very, very limited usefulness because it just doesn't last long enough. It doesn't stay in the body long enough to really observe any changes.
Yeah, that's something that I would.
In and out, it's like being shot out of a cannon and smashed back down, like in the old circus. Yeah, come get shot out of a cannon.
Yeah, that's definitely something that I would agree with you on. And I myself, I've been in various conversations with the people working with the psilocybin studies and whatnot at Johns Hopkins, and I've really encouraged them. It's like, please, someone needs to do a study of 5-MeOs. This really needs to be addressed, that this is such an amazing molecule and the experience is so profound that why isn't anyone studying this? So I've tried to rattle those cages a little bit myself, and appreciate your efforts there.
Definitely. Right. And they could see, they don't like to do studies with something you have to smoke. That's understandable.
Yeah.
Smoking kills cancer, blah, blah, blah. But snuffing, see, is different. You could measure the dose very exactly, and it doesn't affect, it's a very small amount. You could have a hygienically exactly measured snuffing amount. And you could be very scientific about it completely and have a controlled study. So that would be very worthwhile.
Yes. Well, I certainly hope that someone goes in that direction out there in research land. I think it would be really amazing to see some research like that.
Right. Okay. We're done. Yes?
Yes. Ralph, thank you so much for being on the show today. It's really been a great pleasure to speak with you.
So thanks for inviting me. Appreciate it.
And once again, your website is www.greenearthfound.org, and it's all typed as one word.
Right. Great. Thank you. All right.